Welcome back to As a Former History Major, a show where I explore niche history topics that you probably never heard of. I'm your host, Kendall. Welcome to episode 3. It's October. It's spooky season. I decorated. Now let's talk about monster texts. I am taking a monster literature class at UAB right now, and I love it. It is so much fun. I've learned so much stuff, and we're reading Beowulf right now, but we learned about the manuscript that Beowulf is in, and it's the only surviving copy that there is of Beowulf, like ever. And it's in the Nowell Codex, otherwise known as the Beowulf Manuscript. All of these stories in one way or another talk about monsters or otherworldly people or creatures or other cultures and things like that. And that's why scholars call this like kind of a book of monsters, which I thought would be pretty cool to talk about for like Halloween and October vibes. So what exactly is the Beowulf Codex? Well, it's only a part of a manuscript that was written around 1000 CE, and it now sits in the British Library.
The manuscript contains 2 codexes, the Southwick Codex, including 4 texts, Soliloquies of St. Augustine, Gospel of Nicodemus Fragment, Debate of Solomon and Saturn, St. Quentin Homily Fragment, and then the Nowell Codex, comprising 5 texts that I've personally analyzed. Somewhat. I've read most of them. Life of St. Christopher, Wonders of the East, Alexander's Letters to Aristotle, Beowulf, and the Story of Judith.
Also, the difference between like a codex and a manuscript. A codex is like defined by like the cluster of pages that it's in. So basically this manuscript had 2 codexes in it. So it's like one cluster of pages, the other cluster of pages like bound together. And then those 2 were bound together. And that's what separates them pretty much. So the first text in this portion of the codex is called The Life of St. Christopher. It's the legendary story of St. Christopher, and he's like this legend and this figure who's associated with supernatural strength and endurance and also the head of a dog. He is known as a Cynocephali, and if you remembered that from last episode, you know that those are dog-headed people who dwell in the mountains.
Tradition develops basically as a series of misunderstandings, confusions, and fantastical exaggerations. All of this boils down to a simple mistranslation. The term Cainite, meaning sons of Cain, Canaanite, Canaanus, meaning giants of Canaan, and Canaanite, Caninus, meaning dogmen. It is due to this that St. Christopher has been associated with the monstrous appearance of a dog head.
So next in the codex is Wonders of the East, and Wonders of the East describes all of these insane, barbaric, odd, magical creatures and humans and tribes that live in the East compared to Anglo-Saxon England.
Many of our creatures from last episode are described in this text, like the Blimai and Panati. In addition, the Wonders of the East demonstrates the mutual mistrust between men and monsters because the creatures either flee from humans, harm those that come near humans, or just eat humans. The further away from Anglo-Saxon England, the stranger these creatures become, reflecting an Anglo-Saxon construction of the East through cultural and racial typecasting.
So next is Alexander's Letter to Aristotle, which is actually an ancient Greek text, and I'll remind you that this was written in around 1100 CE, and that is a lot later. So this is by no means an actual historical account. Alexander's Letters to Aristotle is a purported letter from Alexander the Great to the philosopher Aristotle, and it concerns his adventures to India.
Alexander is telling Aristotle of his defeat of the Indian king Porus and the monstrous men, culture, and beasts that inhabit India. He describes large snakes and giant crabs, followed in succession by giant white lions, giant pigs, giant bats, and the beast called Odontotyrannus, which is larger than an elephant with 3 horns on its forehead.
Beowulf is the next to last text in the manuscript. It's written in poetry. It's the famous story that we all know and love, the story of Beowulf.
It tells of Beowulf, a Geatish warrior who travels to Denmark to save the king and his men from a terrible monster, who goes on to slay the monster's mother and a dragon.
So this one and the next one are both written in poetry, which I think is really interesting. I mean, it's interesting to think about the layout of all of it anyway. Like, that's an entire conversation to have, is, you know, why did Alexander's letters come before Beowulf? Why did Beowulf come before Judith? Why did St. Christopher come before all of it? I think it's really interesting to see what the stories say and their layout of it. Because, you know, if you're like a medieval scribe and you're writing this stuff down, like, there has to be reasonings behind it, you know? Like, I think it's just very interesting to think about. So Judith is the very last text in the Codex, it's the very last thing in the entire manuscript, and it is also told in poetry.
It is a retelling of the book of Judith in the Bible. It tells of a Jewish widow, Judith, who uses her beauty and charm to cut off an Assyrian general's head who has besieged her city of Bethulia.
The origin of the manuscript is completely unknown, but it may have belonged to one of the monasteries which was dissolved by Henry VIII.
It first is mentioned in 1563. The owner, who was gathering manuscripts for a proposed dictionary, signed his name on the first page, Lawrence Nowell, who we get the Nowell Codex from, and eventually came into the possession of the antiquarian Sir Robert Cotton.
We gotta give a shout out to Sir Robert Cotton. Man, he really liked books. This dude really liked books. Not only that, he really liked manuscripts, and he collected so many manuscripts. His collection was the beginning of what we know as the entire British Library.
Born in 1571, Cotton was a politician and antiquarian who amassed a massive collection of medieval manuscripts, which later became part of the British Library. The Beowulf Codex was part of his collection, and that's why the manuscript has such a long name. MS, Cotton, Vitellius, A.15. MS means manuscript, Cotton was the name of the collector, Cotton named his bookshelves in his library after famous historical leaders, and this manuscript sat on his shelf holding the bust of Vitellius, and it was the 15th volume on that first shelf.
In 1700 CE, the Cotton Library was given to the British nation and it was moved into the Ashburnham House at Westminster, which was thought to be a safer location to prevent from fires and such. But 2 years later, on October 23rd, 1731, there was a fire.
The workers broke into the burning building and carried away, or threw from the windows, hundreds of threatened volumes. Of the 958 manuscripts in the library, several hundreds were severely damaged either by fire or water, and 13 were completely destroyed. The Beowulf manuscript survived, but was burnt along its exposed edges. If you look at it today, you'll see burnt edges and missing pieces of text. It's a miracle that we even have it. In the 19th century, the British Museum repaired the books damaged by the fire, by which time much of the text of Beowulf had crumbled away from the edges of the pages. By 1845, Cotton Vitellius A.15 was rebound, mounted on paper frames that helped slow the deterioration of the edges of the pages.
So, to sum it up, Cotton MS Vitellius A.15 is not only the only surviving copy of Beowulf, it is a collection of all sorts of cool monster-ish themed works, and it's also a pretty interesting manuscript to learn about. Alright, thank you for watching, and remember, if I got anything wrong, it's not my fault, it's because I got it from these sources, and after all, I'm just a former history major.